The syringe slipped from Dr. Sarah Mitchell's trembling fingers, clattering against the concrete floor as the massive German shepherd's yellow eyes locked onto hers through the kennel bars. She had sedated dozens of aggressive dogs before, but Thunder's gaze held something that made her blood freeze. Not wild fury, but a deep, calculating intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through her soul. The needle wasn't meant for vaccination. It was filled with enough pentobarbital to stop a heart. Margaret Walsh, the sanctuary director, stumbled backward into the metal shelving, sending bags of dog food tumbling as Thunder rose to his full, terrifying height. His scarred muzzle pulled back, revealing teeth like ivory daggers. But no sound emerged, just that haunting amber stare that had already claimed 3 volunteers this month. Sarah's hand shook as she reached for her radio, remembering the 8-year-old girl who had asked yesterday if the sad doggie would be okay. How could she explain that sometimes love wasn't enough to heal what humans had broken? "Call Margaret immediately," she whispered into the device, her voice barely audible. "We need to make the decision now." What had created this monster? And was there any soul left inside worth saving? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Riverside Animal Sanctuary had been Margaret Walsh's life for 40 years, but she'd never encountered anything like Thunder. The German Shepherd arrived 3 weeks ago in the back of Animal Control's truck, more dead than alive, with burns covering 30% of his body and a chain embedded so deeply into his neck that it required surgery to remove. The police report was sparse. House fire, owner presumed dead, dog found days later scavenging in the ashes. At 68, Margaret had seen every kind of broken animal cross her threshold. Beaten horses that flinched at human touch, cats so feral they drew blood at the sight of a hand, dogs whose spirits had been crushed by years of neglect. But Thunder was different. This wasn't fear or confusion. This was pure, calculated rage directed at every human who dared approach. The sanctuary sat on 12 acres of rolling Tennessee hills, its weathered barns and chain-link runs housing 47 animals awaiting their second chance. Margaret had built this place with her late husband Tom, scraping together donations and grant money, believing that every creature deserved redemption. Now, staring at the stack of overdue bills on her desk, she wondered if their shared dream would die with her. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since Thunder's attacks made the local news. Half the callers demanded his immediate euthanization, while the other half accused her of running a dangerous facility. 3 major donors had already withdrawn their support, and the insurance company was threatening to cancel their policy unless Thunder was removed within 30 days. Emma Grace Patterson was nothing like the usual visitors who came to gawk at the killer dog. The 7-year-old appeared fragile as porcelain, with strawberry blonde curls that caught the afternoon sunlight and pale blue eyes that seemed to hold too much sadness for someone so young. Her grandmother Helen followed close behind, weathered hands protectively hovering near Emma's shoulders. Emma hadn't spoken a word since her father's military funeral 18 months ago. Helen had tried everything: therapy, medication, even sending Emma to live with relatives in California. But the child remained locked in silence, communicating only through her constant sketching. Today was different, though. Emma had specifically asked to visit the hurt animals, her first request for anything in over a year. Helen Patterson had raised 5 children and taught elementary school for 35 years, but Emma challenged every instinct she possessed. The child's selective mutism frustrated doctors who couldn't find a medical cause, and Helen's fixed income barely covered the mounting therapy bills. At 72, she should have been enjoying retirement, not raising a traumatized granddaughter while watching their modest savings disappear. As they walked past the kennel runs, Emma's attention fixated on the isolated building at the sanctuary's far end. Even from a distance, Thunder's presence was unmistakable, a shadow that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Margaret noticed Emma's intense focus and felt a familiar chill. Some connections defied explanation, and in her 4 decades of animal rescue she'd learned to trust those inexplicable moments when damaged souls recognized each other across the vast distance of pain. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary grounds as Emma slipped her small hand from Helen's protective grip and walked purposefully toward Thunder's isolated kennel. Margaret had specifically warned all visitors to maintain a 20-foot distance from the reinforced enclosure, but Emma moved with the quiet determination that Helen recognized from her late son. Emma's father had possessed that same fearless focus when he'd enlisted despite family protests. Thunder rose from his corner like a storm cloud taking shape, his massive frame filling the kennel doorway. The German shepherd's shoulders stood nearly 3 feet high, his coat a patchwork of black, tan, and angry pink scars that told stories no one wanted to hear. His left ear bore a jagged notch where something had torn through cartilage, and his amber eyes held the hollow intensity of a creature that had seen too much darkness. "Emma, honey, we need to step back," Helen whispered, her voice tight with the kind of fear that only grandmothers know, the terror of losing the last precious thing in their world. She'd already buried her husband, watched her son come home in a flag-draped coffin, and helplessly witnessed her daughter-in-law's complete emotional breakdown. Emma was all she had left. But Emma didn't retreat. Instead, she crouched down at the fence line, her pale pink dress pooling around her like flower petals, and reached into her small backpack. Thunder's ears flicked forward, the first sign of curiosity anyone had witnessed since his arrival. The child's movements were deliberate and gentle as she withdrew a piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. The artwork was unmistakably the work of a 7-year-old. Stick figures with oversized heads, a house with windows that didn't quite align, and in the center, a large dog with pointed ears and what appeared to be tears falling from its eyes. Above the drawing, in Emma's careful first-grade handwriting, were the words, "You're not scary. You're just sad." Margaret found herself holding her breath as Emma slid the drawing through the chain-link fence. Thunder approached with the cautious intensity of a predator, but something in his posture had shifted. His hackles remained flat, his tail neither raised in dominance nor tucked in submission, just hanging naturally at his side. He sniffed the paper once, twice, then did something that made Margaret's heart skip. He lay down. For 3 weeks, Thunder had remained standing whenever humans were present, as if perpetual readiness for attack was his only defense against a world that had taught him to expect pain. Now, this massive, scarred warrior was lying in the dirt, his great head resting on his paws, staring at a child's drawing with something that looked almost like wonder. "Good boy," Emma whispered, her voice so soft that Helen had to strain to hear it. These were the first words her granddaughter had spoken in 18 months, and they weren't directed at any human. They were meant for a dog that everyone else considered a monster. Thunder's response was immediate and profound. His ears, which had been pinned back in permanent aggression, slowly relaxed. His breathing, usually sharp and rapid with stress, became deep and even. Most remarkably, his eyes, those fierce amber orbs that had struck fear into grown men, softened as they focused on Emma's small face. Helen felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her silent granddaughter begin to hum. It was a lullaby Helen had sung to Emma's father decades ago, the same melody Emma's mother had hummed during bedtime stories before grief stole her voice. The tune drifted across the kennel yard like a bridge spanning the chasm between 2 wounded souls. Margaret approached carefully, her clipboard forgotten in her trembling hands. In 40 years of animal rescue, she'd witnessed remarkable transformations. Wild horses learning to trust, abused cats rediscovering affection, guard dogs becoming family pets. But she'd never seen anything like this instantaneous connection between a traumatized child and a dangerous animal. "I don't understand," Helen murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "How is this possible?" "Sometimes healing doesn't follow any rules we understand," Margaret replied, watching as Thunder inched closer to the fence where Emma sat. "Sometimes it just happens when two broken hearts recognize each other." Emma reached into her backpack again and withdrew a small, worn teddy bear, faded blue with one missing button eye and a red ribbon around its neck. Helen recognized it immediately. Emma had clutched that bear through her father's funeral, through her mother's hospitalization, through every nightmare and silent day since. It was her most precious possession, the only thing that seemed to comfort her when words failed. Without hesitation, Emma pushed the teddy bear through the fence. Thunder sniffed it gently, then carefully picked it up in his massive jaws and carried it to his sleeping area. He curled his body around the small toy with the tenderness of a mother protecting her young. The transformation that followed Emma's first visit defied every principle Margaret had learned about animal behavior. Within 24 hours, Thunder had stopped pacing his kennel, stopped hurling himself against the chain link when staff approached, and most remarkably, had begun eating regularly for the first time since his arrival. The teddy bear never left his side, and he guarded Emma's crayon drawing as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Emma returned the next afternoon with Helen trailing nervously behind, carrying a small paper bag that rustled with mysterious contents. Word had already begun to spread through the small Tennessee community about the miracle girl who had tamed the savage dog. Margaret watched from her office window as Emma approached Thunder's kennel with the same fearless determination, while Thunder rose to greet her with what could only be described as anticipation. "I brought you something," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible but growing stronger with each word. From the paper bag, she withdrew a peanut butter sandwich cut into small pieces. Thunder approached the fence eagerly, his massive head tilting as he watched Emma's careful movements. When she held out the first piece through the chain link, he took it with surprising gentleness, his teeth never coming close to her small fingers. The scene drew a small crowd of volunteers and visitors, all maintaining Margaret's requested 20-foot safety perimeter, but unable to look away from the impossible sight. Thunder, the dog who had required sedation for basic veterinary care, was allowing a 7-year-old to hand-feed him through a fence. His tail, which no one had ever seen move except in aggressive display, began to wag slowly back and forth. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived that evening for her scheduled evaluation of Thunder's medical progress, but she found herself witnessing something far more significant than physical healing. Emma had convinced Helen to let her stay past normal visiting hours, and the two sat in comfortable silence beside Thunder's kennel as the sun painted the Tennessee sky in shades of gold and pink. "His wounds are healing remarkably well," Dr. Mitchell observed, studying Thunder through binoculars from a safe distance. "But this behavioral change is unprecedented. I've never seen trauma-induced aggression reverse so completely, so quickly." Margaret nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "The board of directors is meeting tomorrow night. They're under pressure from the insurance company and several major donors. There's talk of requiring Thunder's removal regardless of his improvement." The phone call came Tuesday morning at precisely 9 o'clock, just as Margaret was reviewing the financial reports that kept her awake at night. The voice on the other end was professional, but firm, introducing himself as Derek Colton from Colton Security Services. He claimed to be Thunder's legal owner and demanded the dog's immediate return. "I've been searching for him since the fire," Derek explained, his voice carrying the weight of obvious grief. Rex, that's his real name. He belonged to my family. My little girl Sarah loved that dog more than anything in the world. When I heard he'd survived, I knew I had to bring him home." Margaret's hand tightened around the phone receiver. "Sir, I'm afraid Thunder, Rex, has been severely traumatized. He's extremely aggressive with most people." "Are you certain you're prepared to handle a dog with his behavioral issues?" "Ma'am, I've been training dogs for 15 years. I know how to handle damaged animals. Rex needs to be with someone who understands his past, someone who can help him remember who he used to be." The legal papers arrived by courier that afternoon, along with veterinary records showing Derek Colton as Rex's registered owner and documentation proving the dog's identity through his microchip. Margaret studied the paperwork with growing dread, knowing that legally she had no grounds to refuse the transfer. Emma was devastated when Margaret gently explained the situation during her afternoon visit. For the first time since her breakthrough, the little girl fell silent again, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her palms against Thunder's kennel. The German shepherd seemed to sense her distress, whining softly and pushing his massive head against the fence where her hands rested. "He can't go," Emma finally whispered, her voice breaking. "He'll be scared without me." Helen knelt beside her granddaughter, her own heart breaking as she watched Emma's fragile progress threaten to shatter. "Sweetheart, sometimes we have to let go of the things we love. Thunder's first family misses him too." But Thunder's reaction to Derek Colton's arrival Thursday morning told a different story entirely. The moment Derek's pickup truck pulled into the sanctuary's gravel driveway, Thunder's transformation reversed with terrifying speed. The gentle dog who had been accepting treats from Emma's hand was suddenly a snarling, snapping creature throwing himself against his kennel door with such violence that the reinforced steel frame shook. Derek Colton was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested military or police background. He wore expensive work boots and carried a leather leash that looked more like a restraint device than a pet accessory. His eyes, when they focused on Thunder, held something that made Margaret instinctively step closer to Emma. "Easy, Rex," Derek said in a commanding tone that only seemed to escalate Thunder's panic. "Time to come home, boy." Thunder's response was unlike anything Margaret had witnessed during his 3 weeks at the sanctuary. The dog's fear was palpable, his breathing rapid and shallow, his eyes wild with the kind of terror that spoke of remembered pain. He retreated to the far corner of his kennel, making himself as small as possible while never taking his eyes off Derek. "I think we should postpone this transfer," Margaret said carefully, her instincts screaming warnings she couldn't yet articulate. "Thunder needs more time to adjust. Perhaps we could arrange some preliminary visits." "The dog is legally mine," Derek interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that made Helen instinctively pull Emma closer. "I've been patient enough. Rex belongs with his family." The emergency town meeting that Thursday evening packed the Riverside Community Center beyond capacity, with residents spilling into the parking lot and straining to hear through open windows. Margaret had called the meeting after Derek Colton's disturbing visit, hoping community support might provide legal alternatives to surrendering Thunder. What she hadn't anticipated was how deeply divided the town would become over the fate of one traumatized dog. Emma sat in the front row between Helen and Margaret, clutching a new drawing she'd made that afternoon, this one showing Thunder surrounded by children, his tail wagging, with the words, "He's not mean, he's scared," written in careful block letters. Her small voice had grown stronger each day since meeting Thunder, but tonight she seemed to shrink into herself as angry voices filled the room around her. "That animal is a public menace," declared Robert Hayes, whose insurance agency represented several local businesses. 3 volunteers injured, thousands in medical bills, And now we're supposed to ignore legal ownership because a child drew a pretty picture. This is exactly the kind of liability that shuts down operations permanently. Pastor Williams from First Baptist stood to counter, his weathered hands gripping the podium. I've watched Margaret Walsh save hundreds of animals over the decades. If she believes this dog can be rehabilitated, if this child has sparked something miraculous, then we owe it to both of them to find a solution that doesn't involve sending that creature back to whatever hell created him in the first place. Derek Colton had positioned himself strategically near the back of the room, his presence looming like a dark cloud over the proceedings. He'd spent the afternoon circulating through town, introducing himself as a grieving father whose beloved family pet had been stolen by circumstances beyond his control. His story was compelling. A house fire that claimed his young daughter Sarah, months of searching for his missing dog, and now the bittersweet hope of reuniting with the last connection to his lost child. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek said when called upon to speak, his voice carrying practiced emotion, "I understand your concerns about Rex's behavior. He's been through tremendous trauma, just as I have. But I'm trained to handle difficult animals. I've worked with military and police canine units for over 15 years. What Rex needs isn't more strangers trying to change him. He needs to come home to someone who remembers the gentle, loving dog he used to be." The crowd murmured sympathetically as Derek produced a photograph. A little girl with pigtails, hugging a younger, unmarked Thunder in what appeared to be a family backyard. The image was heartbreaking in its normalcy, showing a time before scars and trauma had transformed both man and dog into something harder to recognize. Dr. Sarah Mitchell rose to present her medical evaluation, her voice professional but tinged with obvious concern. "Thunder's physical wounds are healing well, but his psychological trauma runs deeper than anything I've encountered in veterinary practice. His aggressive reactions are consistent with severe PTSD, and his recent behavioral improvements suggest he's beginning to process that trauma in a healthier way. Removing him from this environment now could cause a complete psychological regression." "With all due respect, Doctor," Derek interrupted smoothly, "you've known Rex for 3 weeks. I raised him from a puppy. I think I understand his needs better than someone who's only seen him at his worst." Emma stood suddenly, her small frame trembling but her voice clear. "Thunder talks to me," she announced, causing a ripple of surprised murmurs through the crowd. "Not with words, but I can tell what he's feeling. When that man came today, Thunder was scared. Really, really scared. Not confused scared. The kind of scared you get when something bad is going to happen again." Helen placed a protective arm around Emma's shoulders, her grandmother's instincts warring with pride at her granddaughter's courage. "Emma has always been sensitive to animals' emotions," she explained to the crowd. "Before her father's death, she volunteered at the veterinary clinic, and Dr. Peterson often commented on her unusual ability to calm frightened pets." The meeting grew increasingly heated as residents chose sides. Local business owners worried about insurance liability and property values, while animal lovers rallied around Emma's story of redemption and healing. The debate revealed deeper community tensions about change, progress, and who deserved second chances in a world that often seemed unforgiving. Margaret found herself defending not just Thunder's future, but the sanctuary's entire mission. "For 40 years, this facility has been built on the principle that no creature is beyond redemption," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent saving the unwanted and forgotten. "We've rehabilitated horses that couldn't be touched, cats that had forgotten how to trust, and dogs that had given up hope entirely. Thunder represents everything we believe in, that love and patience can heal even the deepest wounds." The financial reality underlying the debate couldn't be ignored. Margaret's books showed mounting debts, canceled donations, and insurance premiums that had tripled since Thunder's arrival. The sanctuary's annual funding relied heavily on community support, and tonight's division threatened everything she'd spent her life building. Young Mother Lisa Chen stood up holding her toddler, her voice shaking with emotion. "My daughter asks about the sad doggy every time we drive past the sanctuary. She wants to know why some animals get to be happy and others don't. How do I explain that sometimes we give up on healing because it's easier than fighting for what's right?" Derek's supporters weren't limited to business interests. Retired police officer Jim Sullivan had worked with K-9 units for 2 decades before moving to Riverside. "I've seen what happens when traumatized animals don't get proper handling," he argued. "That dog needs structure, discipline, and someone who understands pack dynamics. A 7-year-old child, no matter how well-meaning, can't provide what a damaged police dog requires." As the meeting stretched past its scheduled time, Emma made another unexpected move. She walked to the microphone with her latest drawing, holding it up for everyone to see. This one was different, darker, more sophisticated than her usual childlike artwork. It showed 2 figures, a large dog cowering in a corner, while a shadowy human figure loomed overhead with what appeared to be a raised hand. "I dream about Thunder's old life sometimes," Emma said, her voice carrying an eerie maturity that silenced the room. "In my dreams, he's trying to protect someone small, but he can't. Someone hurt him when he tried to be good. That's why he learned to be scary, because being scary kept him alive." Derek's composed facade cracked for just a moment, his face flushing red before he regained control. "Children have active imaginations," he said dismissively. "They create stories to make sense of things they don't understand. Rex was never mistreated in my home. He was loved and cared for until the fire destroyed everything." But Emma wasn't finished. She'd brought her entire collection of drawings about Thunder, spreading them across the front table like evidence in a court case. Each image told part of a story: Thunder protecting a small figure from danger, Thunder with tears in his eyes, Thunder surrounded by darkness, and finally, Thunder bathed in light with Emma beside him. "The pictures just come to me," Emma explained, her innocence making her words more powerful than any adult testimony. "Thunder shows me things in my mind. He wasn't always mean. Someone made him mean because they were mean first. But he remembers being good, and he wants to be good again." The room fell silent as residents studied the child's artwork, each drawing revealing layers of intuition that seemed to transcend normal childhood understanding. Helen watched her granddaughter with a mixture of pride and protective fear, knowing that Emma's unusual empathy had always set her apart, but worried about the burden such sensitivity placed on such young shoulders. Margaret called for a preliminary vote to gauge community sentiment, knowing it carried no legal weight but hoping it might provide moral authority for whatever came next. The results were closer than anyone expected. 53% supported finding a way to keep Thunder at the sanctuary, while 47% felt legal ownership should be respected regardless of emotional attachments. Derek's reaction to the vote was subtle but telling. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a brief moment his carefully constructed grieving father persona slipped to reveal something colder underneath. Several residents later reported feeling uneasy about his intensity, though none could articulate exactly what had triggered their discomfort. As the meeting adjourned with no clear resolution, Emma approached Derek directly despite Helen's attempts to guide her away. "Why are you scared of Thunder being happy?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. Derek knelt to Emma's eye level, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. I just miss my family, and Rex is all I have left of better times. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions that children don't understand." "Thunder doesn't miss you," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "He's scared you'll hurt him again." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, causing nearby conversations to halt as people strained to hear Derek's response. His composure finally cracked completely, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that only Emma and a few nearby adults could hear. "You don't know anything about me or my dog, little girl. Rex belongs to me, and he's coming home whether you like it or not." Friday morning brought the legal hammer Margaret had been dreading. Derek Colton arrived at the sanctuary with Sheriff's Deputy Martinez and a court order requiring Thunder's immediate transfer. The document was ironclad, signed by Judge Harrison, witnessed by a notary, and backed by Tennessee state law regarding property rights. Margaret's hands shook as she read the official language that would separate Emma from the only thing that had brought her voice back. "I'm sorry, Margaret," Deputy Martinez said quietly, his weathered face showing genuine regret. "I know what this place means to the community, but the law is clear. The dog belongs to Mr. Colton, and we have to enforce the court's decision." Thunder seemed to sense the impending crisis before any human spoke a word. The German shepherd had begun pacing his kennel at dawn, his ears constantly swiveling toward the sanctuary entrance, his body language screaming anxiety. When Derek's truck pulled into the gravel parking area, Thunder's behavior escalated to pure panic, throwing himself against the kennel walls, howling with a sound that carried pain so deep it made hardened animal workers weep. Emma arrived with Helen for what they didn't know would be their final visit. Her small backpack filled with new drawings and a homemade dog biscuit she'd convinced Helen to help her bake. The moment she saw the official vehicles and Derek's satisfied expression, she understood what was happening. Her scream of "No!" echoed across the sanctuary grounds, sending every animal into agitated response. "You can't take him!" Emma cried, running toward Thunder's kennel with Helen struggling to keep pace. "He doesn't want to go with you. Can't you see he's scared?" Derek's transformation from grieving father to cold authority figure was immediate and chilling. "Rex is my property, and he's coming home today. These people have filled your head with nonsense, but I know what's best for my dog." Thunder's reaction to Derek's approaching footsteps was unlike anything the sanctuary staff had witnessed. The massive dog began self-injuring, scratching at his healing wounds until blood seeped through his fur, pressing himself into the farthest corner of his kennel as if trying to disappear entirely. His breathing became rapid and shallow, classic signs of a severe panic attack that made Dr. Sarah Mitchell fear for his life. "This animal needs immediate medical intervention," Dr. Mitchell announced, positioning herself between Derek and the kennel. "His stress levels are dangerously elevated. Forcing this transfer now could cause complete psychological collapse or even cardiac arrest." "The dog will calm down once he's away from all these strangers," Derek replied dismissively, pulling a heavy-duty muzzle and restraint harness from his truck. "Rex just needs firm handling from someone who understands discipline." Margaret watched in horror as Derek approached Thunder's kennel with equipment that looked more suitable for capturing wild animals than transporting a pet. The muzzle was reinforced steel, the harness designed to completely immobilize the wearer, and the leash was actually a catch pole used by animal control officers. This wasn't the gear of a loving owner, it was the equipment of someone who viewed Thunder as a dangerous object to be controlled. Emma's desperation reached a breaking point as she threw herself against the kennel gate, her small hands clinging to the chain link as if she could physically prevent Thunder's removal. "Please don't hurt him anymore," she sobbed, her words barely comprehensible through her tears. "He just wants to be loved." "Why won't you let him be loved?" The crowd that had gathered included many residents from the previous night's meeting, drawn by news of the forced transfer spreading through the small community's communication networks. Pastor Williams stood with his congregation, several elderly women openly weeping as they watched Emma's heartbreak unfold. Local teacher Nancy Foster had brought 3 of her students who'd been following Thunder's story, thinking they'd witness a happy reunion rather than what felt like a kidnapping. Helen tried to comfort her granddaughter while fighting her own urge to physically intervene. At 72, she'd lived through enough loss to recognize the moment when hope dies, but watching Emma's progress unravel felt like losing her son all over again. The child who'd finally found her voice was retreating back into silence with every minute that passed. "Emma, sweetheart, we have to let Thunder go," Helen whispered, her own voice breaking. "Sometimes the world isn't fair, but we have to be strong." "I won't be strong!" Emma screamed with more force than anyone had heard from her since her father's death. "Being strong is stupid. Being strong means letting bad things happen and pretending it's okay." Derek's patience was clearly wearing thin as Thunder continued to resist every attempt at handling. The dog had wedged himself so tightly into his kennel corner that extracting him would require either sedation or physical force that could cause serious injury. Deputy Martinez looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, his law enforcement training warring with his obvious sympathy for both the animal and the child. Dr. Mitchell made one final attempt to delay the transfer on medical grounds. "Mr. Colton, I strongly recommend postponing this move until Thunder can be properly medicated for anxiety. His current state makes safe transport impossible." "I don't need a veterinarian to tell me how to handle my own dog," Derek snapped, his careful public persona finally cracking completely. "Rex survived worse than this when I found him after the fire. A little stress won't kill him." The casual cruelty in Derek's voice sent chills through the watching crowd, but it was Thunder's reaction that provided the most damning evidence. At the sound of Derek's harsh tone, the dog began a low, continuous whine that spoke of remembered pain. His scarred body trembled uncontrollably, and he began what animal behaviorists call displacement behaviors: repetitive scratching, pacing, and self-grooming that indicated extreme psychological distress. Emma noticed something the adults had missed in their focus on the legal and medical arguments. Thunder wasn't just scared of Derek. He was trying to communicate something specific. The dog kept looking toward the sanctuary's main building, then back at Emma, as if urgently trying to direct her attention somewhere important. "He's trying to tell me something," Emma announced suddenly, wiping tears from her face and studying Thunder's behavior with the intense focus she'd always shown with animals. "He keeps looking at the office building. There's something there he wants me to see." Margaret followed Emma's gaze toward the administrative building where she kept decades of sanctuary records, medical files, and correspondence. A terrible possibility began forming in her mind as she remembered Thunder's unusual reaction to Derek's voice on the phone, his specific fear responses, and the gaps in Derek's story about the house fire. "Deputy Martinez," Margaret said carefully, "I'd like to request a brief delay while we verify some documentation. There may be discrepancies in Mr. Colton's ownership claims that need investigation." Derek's reaction was immediate and telling. His face flushed red, his hands clenched into fists, and he took an aggressive step toward Margaret that made Deputy Martinez instinctively place his hand on his service weapon. "The paperwork is legally binding. You can't delay this any longer with bureaucratic nonsense." "Actually, ma'am," Deputy Martinez said thoughtfully, "if there are questions about the documentation, we should probably sort those out before proceeding. Why don't we take a look at what you're concerned about?" As the group moved toward the office building, Thunder's agitation decreased slightly, as if he understood that Emma had received his message. The German Shepherd settled into a watchful position at the front of his kennel, his intelligent eyes tracking every movement while maintaining his defensive posture against Derek's presence. Emma walked beside Margaret, her child's intuition working overtime to piece together the puzzle Thunder had been trying to show her. "Margaret," she whispered, "what if the man isn't telling the truth about being Thunder's family? What if Thunder is scared because the man hurt him before?" The question hung in the air like an accusation as they approached the office door, with Derek trailing behind and Deputy Martinez maintaining careful observation of everyone involved. Margaret's filing cabinets contained 40 years of animal rescue records, including detailed documentation of abuse cases, suspicious ownership claims, and animals rescued from dangerous situations. Thunder's urgent attempts to direct their attention suddenly made perfect sense. Somewhere in those files might be the evidence needed to save his life and protect the child who'd brought light back into his darkness. The real battle for Thunder's freedom was about to begin, and it would be fought with documents, testimonies, and the truth that had been buried beneath Derek Colton's carefully constructed lies. Margaret's hands trembled as she pulled the thick file folder from her cabinet, its manila surface worn smooth from years of handling. The tab read Animal Cruelty Cases, 2019 to 2020. In her careful handwriting, and as she opened it, the black and white photographs that spilled across her desk made everyone in the room gasp audibly. The images showed a German shepherd that was unmistakably Thunder, but in a condition that defied human comprehension. Ribs protruded through matted fur, deep gashes covered his muzzle and ears, and chains had worn raw wounds around his neck and legs. Most horrifying were his eyes. Not the intelligent amber orbs they knew now, but hollow, defeated windows into a soul that had been systematically broken. These photographs were taken by Animal Control during a raid on Derek Colton's property 18 months ago. Margaret read from the accompanying police report, her voice growing stronger with each word. Anonymous tip reported sounds of animal distress. And subject Rex found chained in basement, showing signs of severe physical abuse and malnutrition. Derek's carefully constructed facade shattered completely. His face cycled through emotions, surprise, anger, calculation, and finally a cold fury that made Deputy Martinez step closer to his weapon. "Those photos are fake," he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. "Someone's trying to frame me." Emma moved closer to Thunder's kennel, her small hand pressed against the chain link as she studied the photographs with an expression far too mature for her 7 years. "That's why he was so scared when you came," she said quietly, her words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You hurt him before. You hurt him so bad he forgot how to trust people." The police report painted a picture of systematic torture disguised as training. Derek had been investigated for operating an unlicensed dog fighting ring in his basement, using Thunder and other German shepherds as both fighters and practice targets for more aggressive animals. The case had been dropped due to lack of witnesses and Derek's connections within the local police force at his previous residence. Dr. Sarah Mitchell studied the medical documentation with growing horror. According to this veterinary examination, Rex had been subjected to electric shock training, forced starvation, and deliberate injury designed to increase aggression. The psychological damage assessment recommended immediate removal and specialized rehabilitation. "How did he escape?" Helen asked, her protective instincts making her pull Emma closer, even as the child remained focused on Thunder's reaction to the unfolding revelations. Margaret flipped through more pages, finding Derek's own statement to police. Mr. Colton claimed Rex attacked his daughter during a family gathering and had to be put down. He provided falsified euthanasia records and told investigators the dog had been cremated. She looked up from the file, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "You told everyone your dog died, Derek. You can't claim ownership of an animal you officially had destroyed." Thunder's behavior had transformed as the truth emerged. No longer cowering in terror, he stood at the front of his kennel watching Derek with the alert intensity of a guard dog assessing a threat. His scarred body radiated controlled power rather than fear, as if finally having his story told had returned some measure of his dignity. Derek made one final desperate attempt to maintain his lie. My daughter's death in the fire changed everything. I was grieving, made mistakes, but Rex belongs with his original family. These documents are old, irrelevant. Your daughter Sarah is alive and well, Deputy Martinez interrupted, holding up his radio. I just spoke with social services in your old county. She's been in foster care since your arrest 18 months ago. The house fire story is completely fabricated. The moment of truth arrived like a dam bursting. Derek's mask of grief and loss crumbled entirely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper as he stared at Emma with undisguised hatred. That dog was trained to kill, and one day he'll remember what he really is. When he turns on you, little girl, don't say, "Nobody warned you." Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she looked Derek directly in the eyes with a courage that made every adult present feel simultaneously proud and protective. "Thunder already remembers what he really is," she said clearly. "He's someone who protects people who can't protect themselves." "That's why you're so scared of him." Thunder's response to Emma's words was immediate and profound. The massive German shepherd moved to the gate of his kennel and sat in perfect formation, his posture radiating the disciplined bearing of the police dog he'd once been. For the first time since Derek's arrival, his tail wagged, not with fear or submission, but with the quiet confidence of a guardian who knew his duty. Deputy Martinez began reading Derek his rights as additional charges were radioed in from neighboring counties where similar animal abuse cases had been linked to his name. The man who'd arrived that morning claiming to be a grieving father was revealed as a serial animal abuser whose cruelty had finally caught up with him. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he turned back one final time, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over!" he shouted toward Thunder's kennel. You can't change what that animal is, but Thunder had already proven Derek wrong simply by choosing love over vengeance, trust over fear, and Emma over the darkness that had once consumed him. The revelation of Derek's true nature should have brought immediate relief, but Emma's world shattered in a completely unexpected way. 3 days after Derek's arrest, as the media circus surrounding Thunder's rescue story reached national attention, Helen collapsed in her kitchen while preparing Emma's breakfast. The 72-year-old woman had been hiding her heart condition for months, unwilling to burden her granddaughter with another loss. But the stress of recent events had pushed her frail cardiovascular system beyond its limits. Emma found Helen unconscious on the linoleum floor, her grandmother's face ashen and her breathing shallow. The little girl who had shown such courage in facing down Derek now became a terrified child again, her voice disappearing as she called 911 with trembling fingers. By the time the ambulance arrived, Helen's pulse was barely detectable, and the paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her for transport to Nashville General Hospital. At the hospital, Dr. Patricia Kim delivered the devastating news with the gentle professionalism that came from years of practice. Helen had suffered a massive coronary event, complicated by her advanced age and undiagnosed diabetes. The next 72 hours would be critical, but even if she survived, the damage to her heart muscle was extensive. Emma might lose the only family she had left in the world. Margaret found Emma in the hospital waiting room, curled into a plastic chair that dwarfed her small frame, clutching the drawing she'd been working on when Helen collapsed. The artwork showed Thunder and Helen sitting together in their small living room, with Emma between them, all 3 figures surrounded by hearts and flowers. The innocent optimism of the child's vision made Margaret's throat tighten with emotion. "Where will Emma go if Helen doesn't make it, Doctor?" Mitchell asked quietly, pulling Margaret aside as Emma dozed fitfully against the uncomfortable hospital furniture. "Social services has been asking questions. She doesn't have any other family. and the state will want to place her in foster care. The bureaucratic machinery was already grinding into motion. Caseworker Linda Morrison arrived the following morning with a clipboard full of forms and an expression of practiced sympathy that couldn't quite hide her overwhelmed exhaustion. Tennessee's foster care system was stretched beyond capacity, and finding placement for a 7-year-old with selective mutism and recent trauma would be challenging at best. Emma will need specialized care, Linda explained to Margaret, her voice professional but not unkind. Her psychological profile indicates severe attachment issues and communication disorders. We'll do our best to find a family equipped to handle her needs, but realistically, she may need to go into a residential treatment facility until we can locate appropriate long-term placement. Emma overheard enough of the conversation to understand that strangers were planning to take her away from everything familiar. Her response was immediate and heartbreaking. She stopped speaking entirely, stopped eating, and refused to leave Helen's bedside even when nurses gently tried to encourage her to rest in the family waiting area. The child who had blossomed under Thunder's influence was retreating back into the protective shell of silence that had kept her safe after her father's death. Thunder's reaction to Emma's absence was equally devastating. The German Shepherd had been thriving in the days following Derek's arrest, showing interest in treats, responding positively to volunteer interactions, and displaying the confident bearing of his former police training. But when Emma failed to appear for their daily visits, Thunder's anxiety returned with frightening intensity. Margaret divided her time between the hospital and the sanctuary, watching helplessly as both Emma and Thunder declined without each other's presence. The little girl who had spoken her first words in 18 months was silent again, while the dog who had learned to trust was pacing his kennel with the restless energy of barely contained desperation. "They need each other," Dr. Mitchell observed during one of her veterinary rounds, watching Thunder ignore his food bowl for the 3rd consecutive day. Emma gave Thunder a reason to heal, and Thunder gave Emma a voice. Separating them now could undo all the progress both have made. The media attention surrounding their story had grown exponentially since Derek's arrest and Helen's hospitalization. News crews camped outside the hospital and sanctuary, documenting what journalists were calling a modern miracle of healing between a traumatized child and an abused animal. But the feel-good narrative was rapidly becoming a tragedy as bureaucratic systems threatened to tear apart the very bond that had captured public imagination. Pastor Williams organized prayer vigils at the hospital, while local businesses contributed to a growing fund intended to help with Helen's medical expenses. The community that had been divided over Thunder's fate now rallied around Emma's crisis, but their goodwill couldn't change the legal realities facing a child with no viable guardian. On Tuesday afternoon, Helen briefly regained consciousness long enough to recognize Emma beside her bed. Her voice was weak but urgent as she gripped her granddaughter's small hand. "Baby girl," she whispered, "you have to keep talking. Don't go quiet again. Promise, Grandma, you'll keep using your voice." Emma's response was barely audible, her words thick with tears and exhaustion. "I don't want to talk if you're not here to listen. I don't want Thunder if you can't see how good he is. I just want everything to go back to how it was." Helen's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to form her final request. "Margaret," she called weakly, gesturing for the sanctuary director to come closer. "Thunder, Emma, they belong together. Promise me you'll find a way. Promise me you won't let them be separated." The machines monitoring Helen's vital signs began their ominous symphony of alarms as her weakened heart finally surrendered to the damage it could no longer sustain. Emma's anguished scream echoed through the cardiac intensive care unit, a sound of such pure grief that hardened medical professionals found themselves wiping away tears. Margaret held Emma as the child sobbed against her shoulder, her small body shaking with the kind of loss that changes everything forever. Helen Patterson had been more than Emma's guardian. She'd been her anchor, her protector, and her connection to the father whose memory grew dimmer with each passing month. Now Emma was truly alone in the world, except for a traumatized German shepherd who was legally property of an animal sanctuary. "I want to go see Thunder," Emma whispered through her tears, her voice hoarse from crying. "I need to tell him that Grandma is gone. He'll understand. He knows what it feels like when someone you love disappears." The drive back to Riverside Animal Sanctuary felt like a funeral procession, with Margaret struggling to find words that might comfort a child facing unimaginable loss. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded around Helen's reading glasses, the only personal item she'd been allowed to take from the hospital room. Thunder sensed Emma's return before her small figure appeared at his kennel gate. The German shepherd rose from his corner with an urgency that spoke of days spent waiting, but his eager anticipation transformed to alert concern as he recognized the grief radiating from the child who had become his entire world. Emma approached the kennel with steps that seemed to carry the weight of adult sorrow, her 7-year-old frame somehow diminished by the enormity of her loss. When she finally spoke, her words carried a maturity born of trauma that no child should possess. "Thunder," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Grandma Helen died. It's just you and me now, but they're going to take me away. They say you belong here and I have to go live with strangers who don't know about you or how special you are." Thunder's response was immediate and profound. The massive dog approached the kennel gate and lay down with his head pressed against the chain link where Emma's hand rested. His amber eyes held an intelligence and understanding that transcended species barriers, and for a moment the traumatized child and the rescued animal shared a grief that needed no words to be fully comprehended. Margaret watched the scene unfold with her own heart breaking, knowing that tomorrow would bring caseworkers and legal documents that would formalize the separation of two souls who had found healing in each other's brokenness. The miracle that had begun with a child's crayon drawing was about to end with bureaucratic inevitability, unless someone could find a way to challenge a system that measured love in terms of legal guardianship and property ownership. The miracle began with an envelope that arrived at Margaret's office 3 days after Helen's funeral, delivered by a courier service during the darkest hour of what seemed like an impossible situation. Emma had been placed in temporary emergency foster care with the Johnson family. Kind people who tried their best but couldn't understand why their new charge spent every waking moment drawing pictures of a German shepherd and whispering to an empty room as if someone was listening. Margaret's hands shook as she opened the envelope bearing the letterhead of Patterson, Williams Associates, a Nashville law firm she'd never heard of. Inside was a document that would change everything. Helen Patterson's last will and testament, executed just 2 weeks before her death with modifications that seemed to anticipate the exact crisis now unfolding. "I, Helen Elizabeth Patterson," the will began in formal legal language, "being of sound mind and body, do hereby make the following provisions for the care of my granddaughter Emma Grace Patterson and her emotional support animal, a German shepherd known as Thunder, currently residing at Riverside Animal Sanctuary under the care of Margaret Walsh." The document was extraordinary in its specificity and foresight. Helen had not only designated Margaret as Emma's legal guardian, but had also established a trust fund worth over $300,000, money Helen had secretly accumulated through decades of careful saving and a life insurance policy she'd never mentioned to anyone. The trust was specifically designated for Emma's care and Thunder's maintenance with strict provisions that the two could never be separated. "Mrs. Patterson was very particular about the language," explained attorney David Williams when Margaret called his office in stunned disbelief. She came to us 6 months ago, right after Emma started showing improvement with the dog. She said she'd seen enough heartbreak in her lifetime to know that bureaucratic systems don't understand love, so she wanted to create legal protections that couldn't be challenged. The will contained additional surprises that revealed the depth of Helen's preparation for this moment. She had researched Tennessee's guardianship laws extensively, documented Emma's improvement since meeting Thunder with medical and psychological evaluations, and even secured character references from community members attesting to Margaret's fitness as a guardian. Most remarkably, she had arranged for Thunder's ownership to transfer directly to Emma upon Helen's death, making the child and dog legally inseparable. Margaret drove to the Johnson house that afternoon with the legal documents and a heart full of hope tempered by disbelief. Emma was sitting in the backyard, having refused to come inside for lunch, clutching a worn photograph of Thunder that Margaret had given her. The little girl's foster mother, Barbara Johnson, watched through the kitchen window with obvious concern. "She hasn't spoken a word since she arrived," Barbara explained as Margaret approached. "She eats just enough to survive, sleeps maybe 3 hours a night, and spends all her time either looking at that photograph or drawing pictures of the same dog over and over. My husband thinks we should call the caseworker about possible medication." Emma looked up when Margaret's shadow fell across her small figure, her eyes showing a flicker of hope for the first time in days. "Did you come to tell me about Thunder? Is he okay? Does he miss me?" "Emma, sweetheart," Margaret said gently, kneeling beside the child, "I came to take you home. Your grandmother made sure that you and Thunder would never have to be separated again." The legal proceedings that followed moved with surprising speed, aided by Helen's meticulous preparation and the public attention that Emma and Thunder's story continued to generate. The same media coverage that had once threatened to become tragedy now provided powerful advocacy for keeping the pair together. Letters poured in from around the country, many from veterans and trauma survivors who understood the healing power of human-animal bonds. Dr. Patricia Kim, who had treated Helen during her final days, provided crucial testimony about Emma's psychological state and the documented benefits of her relationship with Thunder. "This child has experienced multiple traumas that would challenge adult coping mechanisms," she told the family court judge. "Her attachment to Thunder represents the only consistent source of healing and stability in her young life. Separating them now would be tantamount to psychological cruelty." Judge Sarah Crawford, a veteran of family court with 30 years of experience, had seen countless custody cases, but admitted that Emma and Thunder's situation was unprecedented. "The court recognizes that traditional placement procedures don't address the unique circumstances of this case," she stated during the final hearing. "Mrs. Patterson's will demonstrates extraordinary foresight in protecting both child and animal from systemic separation." The moment when Emma was officially placed in Margaret's custody felt less like a legal proceeding than a homecoming. The 7-year-old girl who had been silent and withdrawn for weeks suddenly came alive again, her voice clear and strong as she thanked the judge and asked if she could go home to Thunder right now, please. Thunder's reaction to Emma's return was nothing short of miraculous. The German Shepherd had been declining steadily during their separation, refusing food and showing signs of depression that concerned Dr. Mitchell. But when Emma's small figure appeared at his kennel gate, Thunder transformed instantly from listless patient to joyful companion. His tail wagged with such enthusiasm that his entire body seemed to vibrate with happiness, and the gentle whine he made when Emma opened the gate spoke of relief too profound for human understanding. "Hello, Thunder," Emma whispered as she wrapped her arms around the massive dog's neck. "I'm sorry I was gone so long. Grandma Helen made sure we could stay together forever. She knew we needed each other." Thunder's response was to rest his great head against Emma's shoulder, his amber eyes closing in contentment as the child who had saved his soul was finally returned to him. The scene was witnessed by several sanctuary volunteers who later described it as one of the most moving reunions they'd ever observed, not just between pet and owner, but between two damaged beings who had found healing in each other's love. Margaret's transition to legal guardian required significant adjustments to both her personal life and the sanctuary's operations. At 68, she had never imagined raising a child, but Emma's presence brought unexpected joy to the weathered buildings and quiet routines. The little girl's artistic talents flourished under Margaret's encouragement, and her drawings began evolving from simple crayon pictures to sophisticated illustrations that captured the personalities of every animal in their care. The trust fund Helen had established proved sufficient not only for Emma's immediate needs, but also for expanding the sanctuary's programs. Margaret used a portion of the money to create the Thunder program, a specialized initiative pairing rescued animals with children who had experienced trauma. The program's success rate was remarkable, with child psychologists documenting significant improvements in communication, emotional regulation, and social skills among participants. Thunder himself became something of a celebrity, but his fame never went to his magnificent head. The German Shepherd seemed to understand his role as ambassador for both rescued animals and traumatized children, displaying infinite patience with young visitors while maintaining his fierce, protective instincts when needed. His transformation from aggressive, untouchable animal to gentle therapy companion became a case study in trauma recovery that was cited in veterinary and psychological journals nationwide. Emma's own healing continued to astound the professionals who monitored her progress. The selective mutism that had characterized her response to her father's death disappeared entirely once she was reunited with Thunder. Her vocabulary expanded rapidly, her academic performance exceeded grade-level expectations, and her natural empathy with animals developed into what could only be described as a gift for interspecies communication. Emma doesn't just understand animals, Dr. Mitchell observed during one of Emma's regular psychological evaluations. She seems to help them understand themselves. Her presence alone can calm aggressive dogs, soothe frightened cats, and bring out the best in animals that have lost trust in humans. The sanctuary itself was transformed by their presence. Donors who had initially been attracted by the dramatic rescue story continued supporting the facility after witnessing the ongoing work being accomplished. The Thunder and Emma Fund grew steadily, allowing Margaret to hire additional staff, upgrade facilities, and establish an endowment that would ensure the sanctuary's survival long after she was gone. On quiet evenings, Margaret often found Emma and Thunder in the sanctuary's main yard, the child reading aloud while the dog rested beside her with patient attention. The scenes reminded Margaret of why she had dedicated her life to animal rescue, not just to save individual creatures, but to preserve the sacred bonds between humans and animals that made both species more than they could be alone. Grandma Helen was right, Emma told Margaret one evening as they watched Thunder play with a group of newly rescued puppies. Love really is stronger than everything bad that happens. Thunder taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless, and I taught him that scared doesn't mean mean. The wisdom in those simple words captured the essence of their extraordinary journey. From a terrified, aggressive dog and a silent, traumatized child to a family built on understanding, healing, and the transformative power of unconditional love. Their story had become proof that sometimes the most damaged souls are capable of the greatest healing, and that love truly can triumph over even the darkest trauma when given the chance to flourish. Thunder's legacy would extend far beyond his own remarkable recovery. The program bearing his name would help hundreds of children and animals find healing together, while his story would inspire legislation strengthening protections for both animal abuse victims and traumatized children. But perhaps most importantly, he had given Emma back her voice and taught an entire community that every being deserves a second chance at happiness. Sometimes life teaches us its most profound lessons through the smallest messengers. Emma and Thunder's story reminds us that healing doesn't follow a timeline, and love doesn't require perfect circumstances to flourish. As we navigate our own seasons of loss, whether it's saying goodbye to lifelong partners, watching grandchildren grow up too fast, or facing the reality that our bodies aren't what they used to be, we might feel like damaged goods, too broken for second chances. But Thunder, scarred and aggressive from abuse, found redemption through the pure heart of a 7-year-old girl who saw past his wounds to his soul. Emma, silenced by grief and trauma, rediscovered her voice through loving something that needed her as much as she needed him. Their bond proves that it's never too late to heal, never too late to trust again, and never too late to become the person or companion someone else desperately needs. In our golden years, when society often makes us feel invisible or burdensome, remember that our greatest contributions might come through the simplest acts of love and understanding. Like Thunder and Emma, we all deserve second chances at happiness. What healing relationship in your life taught you the most about love? Have you ever experienced an unexpected connection that changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how love found you when you needed it most.